with the internet. We're not really the users, we're not really the customers, we're the product. But blockchain says it's another way, it's another way.
Blockchain? It's still an experiment in process.
In Africa, now we think about money in a very different way.
In this refugee camp, in this supermarket, all the transactions are authorized and recorded on a blockchain network.
I believe in the power of blockchain.
Open source technology like blockchain is exactly what hackers had envisioned from the beginning.
Are you a hacker?
Yeah, I describe myself as a hacker.
Blockchain is going to scare the shit out of some very powerful people.
Blockchain is just a scam.
A lot of this stuff is going to go away.
It doesn't serve any useful function.
A fraud.
What we're trying to stop is simple. We're trying to stop the abuse of power.
Coin spice.
Yeah.
Let's hold y'all what's talking about. They heard y'all what's talking about. What's talking about? Y'all, you're getting stomped by the marching band. Keep them shook like spray cans. It's so hot it'll make your face tan. Ace band rap the place to wasteland. Bitch all in my mouth, but she tastes bland. I feel fake niggas a miss. These snake niggas a hiss, but won't bite. False alarm, and if it don't rock, while we finna drop.
For me, in my experience with these technologies, going back to Napster, goes back before Napster, but in terms of things that are relevant here, the prevailing narrative is always wrong, as it's always going to be, especially around sophisticated technologies. It's always wrong. And this idea that blockchain is like Kleenex. What does it even mean? It doesn't mean anything. It's a buzzword. It's a buzzword for a ledger, but it's become a buzzword. So this idea that there's this thing called the blockchain that's just going to solve all of our problems and make everybody rich is ludicrous, obviously. However, the technology world is nuanced, and people who are innovating in this space, there's a lot of very intelligent people who are examining the possibilities for using the undergirding of cryptocurrencies, a ledger, to do other things, right? And we know what they are. I mean, obviously you guys know what they are. You're versed in this. And I'm not because I'm not a coder, I'm not particularly interested in the war. I'm not interested in the battle within Bitcoin. And I have sympathies, but I'm not involved in it. I'm not interested in the war between Bitcoin and Ethereum. To me, there's the white what these technologies can do, which is obviously tied to Bitcoin because it's the Bitcoin white paper. And then there's the evolution, because it's open source technology, of what all these people are trying to do with this underlying technology. That's very interesting to me. It's probably less interesting to someone who's an expert in Bitcoin. It's just like, guys, it's supposed to do this, just let it do this. I'm not in that community to that degree. So I'm very interested in looking at people who are exploring other ways of manipulating these technologies. Obviously, a lot of them aren't going to work. Obviously, a lot of this is going to fail. We know that. I know that. But some things aren't going to fail. Some things are going to lead to innovations in areas that I don't think we can yet predict. And that's where I'm coming from. So I'm not a hard and fast cynic, but I'm very, very skeptical of this notion that this thing called blockchain is going to, honestly, my perspective on it is that in 10 years, no one's going to know what blockchain is at all, as they shouldn't. It's sort of like knowing about JavaScript. It's like knowing about HTTPS. It's like the average person shouldn't know what a distributed ledger is. It should just do stuff that's useful to them. And at the end of the day, it's actually not very sexy. So, and nor should it be. So that's kind of my position on it. Not really totally true. I was very enthralled by Bitcoin. It was very evident to me when I read the white paper that he had taken a lot of the ideas that were bubbling around during the heyday of the cypherpunks and had done what they had all wanted to do. There had been talk about dark markets back in the day of the cypherpunks. There had been talk about cryptocurrencies back in the day of the cypherpunks. I think Tim may have even written up his own paper about that well before Satoshi, maybe even in the 90s. So, these were ideas that were in play during the era of the cypherpunks, which I was very in tune with and sympathetic to. So, as a documentarian, I didn't really feel it was sort of like how I felt about Napster when I first started dealing with Napster. I didn't really think the sort of broader public would understand what was significant for a little while. So I set out to make a movie about that space that became Deep Web, which originally was more of a Bitcoin movie, and I interviewed Gavin Andreessen at Amherst. I went and talked to a lot of people, and it was great stuff. But it was really evident to me that nobody would know what the hell we were talking about, and that the broader public would just be completely lost. And also I got access to Ross Ulbricht's defense team, and that became that movie, as it should have. So it wasn't so much that I had an issue with Bitcoin. It was once blockchain became a bit more of a cultural phenomenon alongside this idea of cryptocurrency, which obviously they're co-joined, but to the public, that showed me that it was probably a good time to start talking about this to a broader audience. I still think we're a little ahead of the game. I don't mean like some kind of prescient way, as much as I still think it's so early for the average person. You know, they all came running when the money started happening, and they all went running away when the money stopped happening, and that tells you a lot about how little they understand about the significance of Bitcoin and these technologies. But my interest was more making sure they'd had enough of a toehold in the culture to make a movie about it, and the blockchain concept seemed to be a way in for a lot of people. Well, I'm literally, I'm old. So, so I got interested in computers when they started happening for consumers, because I'm not a coder, which would have been in the 80s. And I got, into the internet as soon as I could figure out the internet, which was also in the 80s, and it was pre-web. So I was very taken by the communities that were beginning to grow on the internet at that time. The BBS era, essentially, Usenet, news groups, all of that. And it was a very thriving community, and I made a lot of connections in that space, and I started to find other people who were interesting, that were innovating in that space. And then we all kind of stayed friendly. And then Napster happened about 10 years later, and I became very interested in Napster pretty much as soon as it happened. I felt a real kinship with the community that was on Napster, but now the World Wide Web had happened since those early days, and now you had someone had leapt ahead into the future and created a community that was in real time with 70, 80 million users. I think at one point they had simultaneously, which was completely unheard of. I mean, beyond, it's like it's like flapping your wings and going to the moon right now. It's completely, it was the age of the dial-up modem. I started telling stories about technology with Napster, and enjoyed that and kept going. I like the people in this community, and I think there's a lot of stories to be told in the community of the information age and these burgeoning communities online. There is no fast answer to that question, by the way, so that's the fastest I got. They came to me. I mean, Kim had seen, I had met her at a screening of Deep Web in New York, and they had seen that film and downloaded, and they knew that I was interested in this space. We started talking, and Jeff Clark from Futurism, the three of us started talking a couple of years ago. I was very interested in telling that story at that time because I knew that it may be a little ahead of its time for a mass audience in terms of their being able to understand what cryptocurrency is, what the white paper means, what the implications are. But the world had gone crypto crazy, and this was before the real peak started happening almost 2 years ago. So, but I could see it coming. I could see that the public was about to erupt in a kind of crypto fervor, and I knew that the lion's share of the public would never really understand even what they were getting excited about. And it struck me as a really good time to tell a story about all the people in this space, because I knew that that moment was going to come and go. I knew that there was going to be this mad rush into the space, and then there'd be some kind of volatility, there'd be some mad rush out of the space. And luckily for us, I don't feel happy for people who lost their money if they were speculating, but luckily for us, that all happened within the window of our production. So we were able to make the movie I wanted to make, which was really about a bubble. It was really about, and not a pervasive bubble of crypto, which we've but that this moment of insane financial speculation that was kind of wrapped up in nothing, was going to erupt, and I really wanted to capture that moment. I thought it was a very important moment in kind of the history of the information age, and I wanted an opportunity to be there when that happened.
Coin Spice.